Welcome to the Business Boom Podcast, powered by Boomtag Media. Each week, we are sitting down with growth-obsessed, dynamic entrepreneurs, marketing experts, and business owners who have cracked the code to explosive growth. I'm your host, Kendra Noel. Let's take things to the next level and spark your business into its boom era. Hello, and welcome to the Business Boom Podcast. Darby, I'm so glad to have you with me today. How are you doing?
Hi, Kendra. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great, and I'm excited to talk about all things podcasting.
Yeah, it's going to be wonderful to get your insights. I would love it if you would just introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, so hi, my name's Darby. I run a podcast production company called Vaden Podcast Services. I'm a podcast producer, manager. I do some editing as well. And what we do is we work with primarily business owners who want to launch a podcast or have a podcast, and we help them with all of their editing and management, with growth, with podcast branding, cover art, music, all the things that go into making a podcast. And yeah, and we also help, of course, grow their shows, eventually help with sponsorships and monetization too. So that's a little bit about what I do. And we've been in business, it'll be officially 2 years this July. So yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you're coming up on that 2-year mark, which is perfect. We've been in contact for at least over a year now. So
Mhm.
I've known you that time, and I got to just kind of watch and see how things have grown. And same for me. When we first started talking, I really, really wanted to do a podcast, but it took a minute before I really felt like I was in the right space. But when I did, I
Right.
knew that Vaden Podcast Solutions was who I needed to talk to.
Yes, thank you. It's been a long time coming, and you have been doing lives, and which is like doing a podcast. And so I just knew you were a naturally good speaker, which is a big, very nice quality in podcasting. And in having on all of these experts, right? So starting this podcast is awesome. Super excited for you. And I've loved to be a part of the process.
Yeah, there was a lot that goes into getting it started up that I didn't know. I really felt like I needed that extra help to like guide me through the process. So when you talk about like getting the music ready and the intro and the outro and a trailer, I didn't even know what a podcast trailer was before we started talking. So and I'm thinking there's probably some listeners who aren't real familiar with that kind of terminology either. So we want to get into how it can benefit your business. But before we dive into that, let's just chat a little bit about those services that you offer.
Yeah. And the services we offer go a lot into podcast launching. So we'll kind of start there. So we have launch specific services like creative ones, such as doing your podcast cover art. I'm a digital artist as well. So I've kind of brought that into the business. And we did Kendra's music. So what you just heard in the intro, Elias, our audio engineer, created that from scratch. And just a note about podcast music is that you want to find royalty free copyright music so that you can use it on YouTube and you can use it on the podcast platforms and not have to worry about any music licenses or your content getting taken down. So, what's cool is that Elias started in producing music, and that's how he's made his way into audio production. And these are original tracks that Kendra owns all the rights to, so she never
Mhm.
has to worry about that. But more into podcast launching, like she said, a podcast trailer, an intro and outro. We help you through the entire process and craft your podcast strategy, plan how your episode content is going to lay out, how you want your intro to flow into the main episode, how you want your outros to sound. We help you edit that and get that put together. Whether you do music through us or not, we help you edit your intro, outro. And your trailer is kind of like a sneak peek into your whole podcast, just like a show trailer, like a Netflix trailer. Your podcast trailer is the same. A good ideal length for it is anywhere from like 2 to 4 minutes long, and you're really just giving an insight and overview of everything you're gonna be talking about and who you are and why you've started this podcast. So those
Mhm.
are kind of the first things we talk about and start editing for the podcast, and a lot of it is, like, branding, music, all of that is kind of podcast branding, right?
Yeah.
And then we get into the episode strategy, um, and we help you with all of that, but more on our services is when we launch, we also help you with a launch runway, and that's just like any launch. You want to put out social posts and emails to let your audience know that, hey, this is coming. And so just strategically dropping some Easter eggs in good content to promote the podcast along the way. We definitely want to be doing that. And we offer audio and video editing, of course. That is like the main service in podcasting. And management, publishing management is a big one too to take off your plate because you're going to be managing your podcast in if you're a video podcast in your YouTube channel and also in your hosting platform. And we help you choose your hosting platform too. And if you don't know what a hosting platform is, that is where you create your RSS feed link and where you manage all of your podcast audio. So some examples of free one is Spotify for podcasters, which used to be known as Anchor, and some other ones are Captivate FM, Buzzsprout, Lisbon, and Podbean. So you definitely want to do some research into which one's best for you. We decided that the best one for Kendra was Captivate FM, which I absolutely
Mhm.
recommend for business podcasts because they have a really cool feature called dynamic ad insertion. So when you want to run ads and monetize one day, it makes it really seamless to do that. And yeah, so we manage your hosting platform. If you're also publishing your podcast to your website, then you will integrate your hosting platform into your website and manage that there as well. We also help with guest services and sponsorship services as well when you're ready to pitch to sponsors.
Yeah. That's all stuff that I'm hoping to get into, but for right now, I'm just so happy to have it up and running, and we're on episode 3. So, hey,
Yeah.
it's up and going, and it's actually been, decent to figure out the platforms and the editing and stuff. It's been a learning curve, but I'm so excited that we just like dove right in and went ahead and got the thing launched because we've been talking about it for a year now. So it does take a while to get to the point where you really feel comfortable and you are okay with launching, even if you don't feel totally ready. But I'm
Yeah.
glad we picked this time to go ahead and get it out there.
Me too. And I feel like launching anything, like even launching a business, you don't ever feel totally ready. But preparing as much as you can, having a launch strategy and a launch runway for everything definitely helps. And also, you're not alone in that. Most podcasters that come to me have sat on their equipment for over a year before because they just didn't know where to begin. Because it can be a lot from just figuring out your equipment on top of everything else can take some time to figure out what's best for you and then learning your equipment and setting it up. That's like step one is getting all of your equipment and stuff ready. So there are things to get together.
Yeah, for sure. And then the licensed music or like having your own music, and you said that that was really important. I have found that to be true for YouTube. I'm part of another
Yeah.
show, a co-host for another show, and every time that show gets put over to YouTube, it has a note on it that there's a
Copy.
copyright issue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so I've only had one so far of the Business Boom go on to YouTube, but I noticed that that was not an issue, and I'm guessing it's because I own that now.
Yes, and why it is because Elias, our audio engineer who made the music, he created that beat from scratch, right? He can make music, but what a lot of people do is they'll go who don't know how to make music, I don't know how to make music, is they'll go onto websites that have royalty-free music, and maybe it's
Mhm.
paid, maybe it's like $30 or maybe it's free. And so the issue there we actually ran into with a podcaster recently is they got free royalty-free music from a very well-known website, and the person who uploaded the music took it from someone else. It wasn't really theirs. And I guess this website didn't copyright check it, so their YouTube videos have a copyright flag, and it actually has no restrictions. But the issue with that is that if you want to monetize your YouTube channel in the future, it could keep you from monetizing any of those videos with the music in it. So it is worth investing in original music that you can use for, like, so long, and you also if you get a whole song, you only use a small part of it for your podcast, so you should be able to use it for a lot of different things for your business too.
Yeah, I love that. And I love my music. So I would definitely recommend using you guys and Elias for that. So,
Thank you.
looks like we have some people joining us. Hello from Atlanta. That's good to see. And someone joining on
Hi.
Team Live. So thank you for that. And make sure if you have questions about podcasting or thoughts you want to add to the conversation, feel free to put that in the chat. But let's go ahead and dive into the topic, which is really tied to how you can use podcasting to grow your business.
Yes. So just where to begin, let's just start with getting into the podcast platforms. So many people are going to podcast as their favorite form of medium for education and entertainment and just knowledge. And we're business people. So I know we both are listening to business podcasters all the time. And if you have a topic that you are an expert about or that you're passionate about, turn it into a podcast. But just getting into the podcast platforms, it gets you into their search and you have the opportunity to be found by thousands to millions of people in Spotify and Apple and YouTube. So YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. And they recently, I think 2023, so not super recent, added podcast RSS feed to YouTube's platform. So as podcasting has been growing and expanding, YouTube is keeping up with this trend and has added RSS feed into YouTube. So you don't have to be a video podcast to have your podcast on YouTube anymore. You can have your RSS feed there and get found on there as well. So there's so much opportunity and it's crazy. A statistic in 2025 this year there are 584.1 million podcast listeners, and in 2023 there were 464.7 million. So that is just a crazy like 6.83% year over year increase in how many people are listening to podcasts. And we're in the United States. The most podcast listeners in the world are here, and then it's like the UK, Canada, and Australia. Those are the most listened to podcast base. But
Okay. So you talked about the number of listeners of podcast has grown tremendously. But let's talk about also the potential for podcasting as a new platform or avenue to reach new people. That's have had a recent boom recently too, right?
oh, yes. And a lot of that is when you're doing a podcast, you definitely want to be dialing in on your SEO. So, SEO in your podcast titles, that is what's going to help you get found. So, if you kind of think of it like a blog post, like posting blogs online, you want all these SEO benefits to drive people to your website. It is a little the same for your podcast episodes and getting found in the platforms. So, having dialed in SEO titles is really going to help you get found. And getting found in the podcast platforms, when I find someone through a podcast, I just instantly know so much more about them than finding them through an Instagram post, right? You hear
Yeah.
their voice, you instantly just connect more to someone's voice than you do to an Instagram carousel. Like, absolutely. And you get to know their values and who they are. And then if you're optimizing your podcast platform, then they can easily find your website and your socials and connect with you that way. And maybe they have that info in their show notes as well.
Yeah. I'm going to direct the attention to a question that came in on the chat. This question is from Emily, and it says, how do you find your audience?
Okay, that is a great question. And this is definitely like step 2 in launching a podcast is dialing in on who your audience is. Because if you are just one, if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. And as podcasting grows more and more, it becomes even more important to dial in on your niche and speak directly to your listeners. So I say SEO is important, but sometimes you really want those titles to speak directly to your listener. And that might be more of your personality than SEO focus. So sprinkle SEO in your description instead, because speaking directly to your ideal audience is super important. So I would say knowing their pain points, knowing their desires, knowing what they need help with, and just and that comes from the focus of your show. Is your show a business podcast like this one that's here to connect with people and help them learn more about all these areas of business, right? So, Kendra, speaking to all of you guys are her ideal listener, and it would be entrepreneurs, business owners who are looking to grow. So,
Right. And because I've just so recently been through the process with you, Darby, I know that one of the things that we had to do was select the category for the podcast. And there was like a
yeah,
primary, secondary, and tertiary um, category, right? So it's like
yeah.
finding your audience, who that's going to appeal to, and then what categories that's going to fall under.
Yes. And so you choose your podcast category when you set up your podcast in the hosting platform. And like Kendra said, you have like a primary, secondary, and a third category that you can choose from. And this is really important because you want to choose a category that aligns with your audience. So you need to spend some time, if you're a business podcast, looking at the categories that other business podcasts are in, other marketing podcasts, other real estate podcasts, whatever you do. And so that you're choosing the category correctly, because that's what's going to help you reach the top charts and rank in the top charts. So, for example, we one of the first podcasts we launched was the birth experience, and it is a birth and pregnancy podcast. And the category that this podcast in is the parenting category. And they have subcategories: parenting, kids and family, parenting, education. And so we choose some of those subcategories, and it might not like it didn't ring for me like that's a parenting podcast, but all the most famous pregnancy podcasts are in that category. So it definitely surprised me a little bit, but she's in the top charts in her parenting category now in the United States. So we chose the right
That's great.
category.
Yeah, so if
Yeah,
you can really niche down and find your space, it's easier to connect with the right audience then and to get your podcast heard by more people. Would you say that's correct?
absolutely. And yeah, just speaking to the right people and choosing those categories correctly is all going to go into also doing some competitor research. Do some competitor research for the top podcast in the category that you want to be in, and see what keywords they're using and see what other categories they're in, and maybe even the length of their episodes and how much they release their episodes too.
Yeah. So I see a lot of people in the chat and I know them well from this platform. We're live right now on LinkedIn and YouTube, but specific to the people who are joining from LinkedIn, I see a lot of people who already use a live strategy. So they're going live with a platform like Restream or StreamYard, something like that, where they're already doing half of a podcast anyway.
Yeah.
And that's something that we talked about in the pre-live. Like that can be a great strategy for people who are already hosting these shows, turning it into a podcast. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I love this strategy for business owners, educators. A lot of educators go live. A lot of the podcasters we work with are already doing lives, and that is a key strategy into their podcast content now, solo or with guests, is that they record and they set up their equipment right so they have a good sound and it's not their phone sound doing a live on your phone or something. And they use their live for multiple things. We'll use lives from months ago as solo episodes in their podcast. So you're killing two birds with one stone. You're maximizing your time, your energy, and your content and your reach.
hmm Yeah. Okay. We have a specific question in the chat from Felipe. And this is for you, Darby. He says, what if, for example, you talk about workplace and HR topics? My audience can be HR professionals, leaders, and job seekers. What would you recommend for different podcasts? Or like maybe that is also saying, like, how would you position that type of a podcast for HR topics?
So definitely in a business categories, I'd put you in all business categories. And as far as your content for HR professionals, leaders, and job seekers, make it all about HR. Um, but yeah, that would be a great podcast idea for a business podcast. Um, and as far as different podcasts, if you're asking for recommendations for one, I don't know any HR podcasts that I can think of, but I do listen to a lot of business podcasts. And I'll just say my favorite one's probably The Future with Christo. That's
Mhm.
been one of the first ones I found. And he runs an agency, a creative agency, but he has experts on. Like I learned a lot from his LinkedIn expert podcast, and that is just something about podcast is it's not just that person, it's all the guests they bring on that adds so much value to their show. It just adds so much information and knowledge.
Right. Okay. Emily has said she loves the intentionality of it. So, talking about intentionality, what we kind of started with was the intention of using a podcast for business. So, you said, find something you love, something that you would be able to talk about. So, that's a good place to start when choosing what kind of podcast to start. But let's now talk about how we're going to use the podcast to grow the business.
Right. So podcasting is very intentional, or it should be if you want it to grow your business. And there's several different ways to do this. One is just sharing who you are, your brand values in your story. So people are really getting to know you, who you are and what you're about, why you do what you do. That alone can sell someone on you and your products over someone who they don't know their story or just found them
Mhm.
from a social post. And
Right.
then we get into having guest experts on, just adding so much value to your show, showing who you support as well. And we do a lot of parenting podcasts and there can be some controversial topics. So being very choosy with your guest in the medical community is very important. So showing people who you trust also shares more about yourself. And another point I'm gonna touch on is infusion selling. So, infusion selling through your podcast, another way to do this would be, like, if you're a service provider like me and I had a podcast, I would bring on some of my podcast clients, and we would talk about how we launched, maybe the first podcast I launched with and the most recent one I launched with and what's changed since then. We'd talk about client wins, how I've helped them grow to the top charts in the United States, showing a transformation. Our parenting podcast, they have a lot of birth stories with their students on. So, stories, transformations are another way that you can showcase your expertise. And infusion selling is more not showing like client stories, but selling your membership or your services or your products by just kind of casually talking about them and talking about the transformation that they leave your clients or your students or whomever with is what infusion selling is versus hard selling. You do want to kind of stay away from hard selling on a podcast, but what you can use are ads to do your hard selling for you. And what I love for beginner podcasters is to run their own ads for their own products and services. And it can sound like this super professional ad that comes in, but it's just you talking, hey, we're taking a break to talk about this, and this, or you can promote something that's coming up in your podcast. So there's so many different ways you can use podcast ads for your own business that just sound so much more natural than I don't know, like the programmatic ads you see on YouTube that cut in
Mhm.
when it's their own voice. You most likely aren't going to skip over it. And that's
Yeah.
actually, there are facts behind it that like 64% of people don't skip through podcast ads. So I think it's also part of most likely multitasking when you're watching a podcast, and so you're just not gonna skip through them.
Yeah. I've seen a really good example of this from someone in the audience. So, Leah is a good friend, and I have seen her do that quick pause within her show. And then she'll say, "Let's hear a quick word from our sponsor." And so she cuts to the sponsor ad, and
Love it.
it is actually an ad for the services that she provides. But I definitely see the value in slipping that in because I don't know about most people who are listening, but I do not love to sell. I do not like to do like that hard push, like you were saying. But if it's something pre recorded that you can have edited, good sound quality, you're not going to be stuttering or like tripping over your words while you're trying to sell because that can make you kind of nervous, right? To have to promote your product or your service. But if you have it built in as part of the podcast, I definitely see that as being a good strategy.
Yeah, so you might have to do that soon, Kendra, and
Yeah,
captivate.
that is definitely a good avenue to be thinking about. So I appreciate the advice. Um, so we talked when LinkedIn just did the audio room. So you and I had done a live previously over a year ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, and it was
Mhm.
about podcast guesting. So, for individuals who are not ready to do their own podcast, but they do enjoy talking, they might want to dive into a conversation on someone else's show. So, let's talk about how you can also use a strategy of podcast guesting to grow your business.
Yes, and I love this strategy because you don't have to be a podcaster to do this, and it can really get you warmed up to wanting to do a podcast or just getting used to doing a podcast. And I don't know if you guys have like noticed, but what a lot of people do nowadays, I think that this has really exploded in the past few years as they do podcast tours to promote their book or promote their business or whatever it is. So, because podcast guesting, podcast tour, whatever you want to call it really works and it really grows your audience. You don't have to have an audience. Um, the amazing benefit is that you're leveraging someone else's audience. And most podcast producers or whatever, they put all of your links in the show notes. And those show notes live on their channel forever, whether it's YouTube or their website. So if you're getting on with a guest that has a really popular blog that gets hundreds of thousands of traffic, monthly traffic, um, your links can get shown to a lot of people. Podcasting goes so beyond just the platforms, but just the benefits of being on someone's podcast and their platform is phenomenal. And so, how you could get started in this is looking at some podcasts that you would be a good fit for. And this is going to be industry relevant podcasts. These are not going to be podcasts that you're a direct competitor to because they might not want you on their show, but someone that you are complimentary to. Like me and Kendra here, a business podcast. I have a business podcast production company, so it's a great fit. And you want to gather their contact info. Maybe you can find their podcast specific contact info, their business email. Or maybe if you can't find an email, DM them on LinkedIn or Instagram and pitch yourself or ask them for their email so you could talk to them more about coming on their podcast. And there's a thing called a podcast one sheet. And if you've heard of this, I'll kind of just answer what that is now. That is like a media kit for you almost, but it's specific to podcasting. And if you don't know what a media kit is, it is basically just where you are on media, about you, your media presence, your business presence. Maybe you throw in some podcasts that you've been featured on, articles that you've been featured on. It's all about you and your business. So, podcasting one sheet is kind of going to be similar. And you don't have to have a one sheet. You could just pitch yourself with all of this information in a nice email too, right? So, some points you want to have when you're pitching yourself to a podcast. I like to start off with, and I pitch my podcasters to people, so I'll be speaking in like third person, is we'll mention an episode that we recently loved of theirs, why we liked it. And this doesn't have to be their most recent, but maybe just, I don't know, some recent episode to show that you've actually listened to the show. And then introduce who you are, or I would introduce my podcaster, who they are, why they're a great fit for the show, go into their story, their background, their expertise, and I'll also drop some examples of topics that we could talk about that are really aligned with their podcast and my podcaster, and then ask them to just get back to me if they think we'd be a great fit. That's pretty
Mhm.
much all you got to do. And I want to say that to not be intimidated by people with thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of followers. Some podcasts will be picky with their guests. I mean, most of them are, but they're not going to care if you have like 200 followers if you are really great at what you do. So just don't be intimidated by follower count, because that's something that I see podcasters are intimidated by, or maybe their show's really big and they don't feel prepared to go on. But I mean, our podcasters with huge shows, they take on people with much smaller businesses than theirs because they're experts at what they do, or a much
Mhm.
smaller social presence, which does not equate to how big your business is. Right.
Right, or how good you are at performing your service.
Exactly.
Definitely, that's really great advice to not be intimidated, to go ahead and pitch yourself. Um, I found that growing my list of potential people I want to interview has been really easy because I just started and I have,
Yeah.
a big list and I've got people I really want to get on the show, great connections, people I've been networking with for a long time. But I can imagine after you're doing this for a while and it's not so brand new that most podcasters are probably always on the hunt for their next guest.
Yes, that is something that you do wanna stay on top of. So, for, like, our longest show, I'll use as an example here, we have guests booked every month, and we probably have, like, 8 episodes on our back burner, but that is small for us. See, we had a point where we had, like, 30 episodes that we could pull from, so we're in the mode of getting more guests booked and booked so we can stay ahead. So staying ahead, whatever that looks like for you, is super important. And that will also depend on how many episodes you put out a month. So if you're a weekly show like Kendra, then you want to be interviewing 3 to 4 people a month so that you stay ahead on your recordings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that advice. Now, once you are producing these shows and you can turn them into long form content, so how can a business really leverage that long form content that podcasts add?
Oh, yeah, I love talking about this because there are several ways you can utilize your podcast or long form content to supplement all of your other content or fuel your content strategy. So I work with a lot of business owners who are very heavy on Instagram content. They're posting daily or multiple times a day on Instagram. And so having podcast clips, short form video clips that they can use for 4 of their reels a week or however many reels a week, and on their YouTube shorts and on their TikTok, it really helps spread out the other stuff that they have to do and reach more listeners. It also helps grow the podcast because you're putting your podcast content onto this platform. So that's one way. Short form video is the most popular way. I'm sure everyone here has seen podcast clips explode on every short form medium
Mhm.
because podcasting is just so popular now and more common than I feel like it's ever been in my lifetime. And another way is what I use podcast transcripts for so many things. And I do want to get into a little bit of like podcasting AI. So I'm going to do some posts on that here soon because I use transcripts and AI tools to do so many things. So one thing I use that for is show notes. So I use Descript for post production, and we love Descript. They have their own AI tools, but sometimes I'll take the transcript from Descript. And Descript, I think someone asked in here about editing tools.
Mhm.
Descript is a phenomenal audio and video editing tool. And if you're really going to get into podcasting, I definitely recommend getting Descript. And then a recording tool, you can use your computer audio processing tool. So for PCs, they have Audacity, and for Mac computers, you can use GarageBand. A audio tool that's built into your computer is going to be the highest quality that you can use. Um, but back to transcripts. If you're using a text-based editing platform like Descript, you get the transcript. You can export that. I upload it to, I use Grok. A lot of you probably use ChatGPT. Whatever AI you use, ask it to summarize and give you show notes. And then you can tweak from there how you want the show notes to be formatted, what you want the show notes to focus on and recap. You can also ask it to pull some podcast clips for you. I just tried this recently and it gave me some pretty good standalone podcast clips. And I was like, okay, AI can actually help me there too, because a lot of the AI podcast clip tools are not very good. So that's another way you can use the transcript. And another way that's very good for your website is you can take the transcript and create a blog post out of it.
Mhm.
And some other things you can do, you can create Instagram posts, you can create um, emails. Emails is another big thing because I think building your email list, also another thing you should be pointing your listeners to from your podcast is to join your email list, build your email list, and then remind people of your business promotions, but also when new episode drops. So that's another strategy you can use to promote the podcast. Um, but yeah, using the transcript is gold for all of these written forms of content and even podcast clips now. So I've been finding that very helpful.
Yeah. I am not much of a writer or a reader, so, like, I'm an auditory learner, so that's one of the reasons why I love podcasts so much,
Oh,
and so
yeah.
on my website, I have never started a blog, but I understand definitely the SEO benefits of having that, blog content on there, so one of the things that we talked about, was creating a page within my website that kinda serves as a blog, but it's actually the podcast episodes with a short description full of those keywords and things that's really going to help with SEO. So that was one thing that really helped me because honestly, I was probably never going to start a blog. But
Right.
this podcast page, I think, is going to be just amazing for business growth and driving traffic to the website.
That's another great point to make is that blogs help your website so much. But like you, I haven't had time for a blog. Maybe I'm making excuses. I want to get into it. But taking your podcast transcript, it's a lot easier to just sit here and talk with you and have a conversation than it is for me to just type out an entire blog. I mean, for me at least. And using all of your podcast content on your website, it really acts as a blog. And so I made a post about this a while ago that it's kind of redundant if you have your podcast transcript on your website to write a blog about the podcast. Not necessarily, but it's because that transcript gives all of the SEO, everything you talked about, and that lives on your website if you have it set up to where your podcast is being published on your website too.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, lots of really great tips here. So we kind of dove into this a little bit, but broadening the reach. So, I love social media and all the avenues that social media gives you to reach new audiences and to really connect with people. But let's talk about how podcasting deepens that and makes that go even further.
Yeah, of course. It I would say choose some platforms to focus on and to focus pushing your podcast content to, but you do have the ability to post everywhere. And that's what I do. I'm on Pinterest, I'm on YouTube, um, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, and my main focuses are Instagram and LinkedIn. Um, I'm a small business owner, so I'm not focusing on every single platform, but I'm able to focus on two and repurpose that content. So just going back to that content versatility, if you use a scheduling platform like Tailwind or Later, you can upload one social post and have it go out to all the platforms. And if you're doing this from your long form content, from your podcast, and really dialing in on a strategy for pushing all of this out everywhere, it can really help you grow and help with your brand visibility and then also help grow the podcast. So, another thing that can really help you grow is having guests on and collaborating with them. So,
Right.
and that goes into like podcast growth and networking, but also on social media because these guests are also most likely business owners or maybe not, but they're probably on social media too, and they have an audience that they can share this collaborative content with to their audience. So it's not just
Mhm.
going into your podcast and everywhere else, but it's being shown to their audience too.
Yeah, I love how that just, multiplies the effect of what you're putting out there, inviting someone to collaborate. I wish that all the, social media platforms had the same option that Instagram gives to invite a
Yeah.
collaborator to the post, because then it shows that the post is going to both feeds, and I feel like you really get the, multiplication effect with that. So, I'm hoping that eventually some of the other social media platforms will pick up on that and give the option to do collaborations on post.
Yeah, that would be cool. And I wonder if Facebook has it because they are Meta too, but it would be great if LinkedIn had it.
Mhm. Absolutely. But even though they don't have it, you can be tagging your guest and talking about your guest and building the excitement for, before the podcast or the live is recorded. And then the same thing afterwards, especially when you're doing those clips, like you mentioned, you can be tagging them and helping promote your guest as well. And hopefully, if they're sharing that to their audience, then the podcast host gets that benefit. So it should be mutually beneficial in that collaboration.
Oh, absolutely. And some other things that just popped into my head about just the longevity of podcasting and being a podcast guest is that old podcast episodes get promoted all the time. So you can have an episode from 2 years ago. That guest could have grown their business tenfold and they're still promoting that old episode because that's what has happened with our podcasts. And it's just crazy. I mean, we promote them on a Pinterest page that has millions of views a month and promote them on a blog that has over 100,000 views a month. And people just don't, these guests probably don't even realize how much visibility they are getting from all the content we put out and just still promoting those old episodes, which when you grow a podcast, that is a key strategy is to still promote your old episodes in different ways. So, and I know that a lot of big shows are still doing that.
Yeah, yeah, I listen to some podcasters who are now on episode 400 and something, and they'll refer back to episode 253. Like they know the specific number, and they'll say, "Go back and listen to episode 253," and they know exactly
Mhm.
why and how it relates to the current topic that they're talking about. So they don't want to have to necessarily rehash the whole conversation that was in that episode, but they know that that episode contains some really powerful things that are applicable to what they're talking about now. So I love that idea of
Yeah.
having the long-term use of your podcast episodes. I hadn't thought about that before, but I think that that's a really great point. And also the strategic collaborations. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. And then just to answer a question real quick, Meryl was commenting on, I think Felipe's question about the podcast that I recommended. It is called The Future, and that is spelled Futur with Chris Doe, and it's Doe is Do.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's a good one, I think, for all business.
Yeah, I've been watching some of his clips lately, and they are just awesome. He has some really great advice. So I would agree, if you're into business podcasts, that would be a really good one to listen to as well. So, all right, we talked about guesting and we talked about leveraging that. As we kind of wrap up, I'm curious if you have a truth bomb you want to lay on us.
A truth bomb.
Mhm.
I say the truth bomb is you're not gonna feel ready to start. You'll probably feel ready once you're like 10 to 20 episodes in. Um, and another truth bomb is that if you want to start a podcast, start planning now. Even if you launch next year
Mhm.
or next quarter, whenever it is, it's always better to be over prepared. So, and I'm not gonna say that you should just launch and start it now. Like, you really should prepare for it because once you launch, it is something you need to keep up with. It
Yeah.
is something that if you want it to grow and you're not doing, like, just a season 1, season 2 here and there, like, if you really wanna grow the show, then you need to stay consistent with it no matter how many times you're releasing. So, if you can't commit to doing a weekly podcast, release twice a month on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday every month and commit to that and stay with it. But, yeah, my truth bomb is you're probably not gonna feel ready until you've already started, so
Yeah, absolutely. That's really great advice. I had start a podcast on my vision board. So I have a friend that we kind of set a vision board for the year, and I kind of make it on Canva so that I have some graphics. And so I started one at the beginning of 2024 that said start a podcast. So here we are, actually over a full year later, so we're a year and 6 months later and just now launched. So sometimes it does take some time. I've been getting really great practice in doing hosting live shows. And so I
yes.
think that that's a great avenue to kind of get comfortable with it. Watching yourself is another thing, watching and listening to yourself. I would advise if anyone's thinking about starting a podcast, have some sort of avenue where you can record yourself, listen to your voice, watch yourself on the camera, kind of see how that goes. Anything else that you would suggest someone who's like, yeah, that's in my future, a podcast is in my future? What else should they be doing?
I actually think the point you just made is a very underrated point to practice. So that is something I would preach after watching podcasters launch and running with their very first recording being their very first episode. It can work, but if you record 3 to 4 episodes and kind of choose which one is the best and go from there, that could help. It's just going to help you get good practice in and notice things like how many times you say or like or those those filler words and just getting good with podcast etiquette, getting comfortable on camera if you're doing a video podcast, all those things.
Mhm. Yeah, so even though I've been hosting lives for a while, I'm not new to watching or listening to myself. So I do these shorty episodes. I've only done one so far because I had the first one was live with Cassidy Handel, and now we're recording episode 3 with Darby. But in between that, I had one that was just me by myself. And that was actually really intimidating, even though I wasn't on camera. It was audio only, just having myself and a microphone. I had to try that one a few times before I felt really comfortable with it. So I think that that's what you said, just practicing is very valuable.
Just doing it. And I
Mhm,
see that Emily said in the chat, loved this, needed to hear this. We are starting, but it is so scary.
mhm.
Yes, well, all the best luck to you. I'm sure that it's going to be great and excited for your podcast launch.
Yeah,
All good things will come
absolutely.
from it.
Well, why don't we just talk about how people can find you if they're interested in starting a podcast or they want some help getting started? We went over at the beginning some things that you do to help individuals who are curious about this or ready to start their journey. So, if you would just tell us how they can get a hold of you and all the different handles that you use on social media for those listening to the podcast platforms as well.
Yes, of course. So I do free discovery calls. So please, if you're interested in just anything podcasting, launching a podcast, or having us help you, definitely book a free discovery call with me. And I will just go into way more specific on you and your business and what a podcast launch can look like for you. And you can find me at vadenpodcastservices.com. And that's Vaden with a V. I am also Vaden Podcast Services on all socials, Instagram and LinkedIn. LinkedIn, you can find me as Darby Faulkner, and Instagram at vaden.podcast.services. So those are the channels I'm most active on. follow me, keep up with me, especially if you're launching a podcast. I would love to follow along and watch that.
Awesome. Well, I see you're getting a lot of love here from Team Live. I can tell that they've enjoyed it and they've been happy to get some questions answered. But make sure that you connect with Darby, even if you're not going out to her website to get specific help. I have followed her for a long time and gained a lot of knowledge just from watching the content that she posts. So she's always posting content about podcasting, and I find it very helpful, and I think our listeners would as well.
Good. I'm glad. And I will be posting a lot more new stuff because this industry is changing all the time. Analytics are changing, the platforms are actually changing. So follow me and keep up, and I'll try to be posting more on that too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for those listening live, and we thank those who end up listening later as well.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you, Kendra.
Thank you. That's it for this week's Business Boom podcast. You've got the spark. Now go light up your business with what you have learned. If you like what you heard today, hit that subscribe button, drop us a review, or tell a fellow entrepreneur about the show. Keep pushing, keep growing, and catch us next week for more booming business strategies.